Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Rick Dunham. I am the Washington Bureau Chief of the Houston Chronicle, former president of the National Press Club, and current president of the National Press Club's educational and charitable arm, the Eric Friedheim National Journalism Library. On behalf of the Press Club Library, I'm proud to welcome tonight's guest, Tom Curley, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Associated Press, to the National Press Club. We're here tonight to hear from one of the nation's leading advocates of free speech and government openness. We're also here tonight to celebrate Sunshine Week, the annual event during which we think about the public's right to know and highlight the need for government to be open and responsible to the people, our readers, our listeners, our viewers, our webizens in this increasingly interactive world in which we work. Sunshine Week is a nonpartisan open government initiative led by the ASNE, working with online and broadcast media, public officials, celebrities, civic groups, nonprofits, libraries, schools, religious leaders, and a few others. It's endowed through a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. And before we really get started here, I'd like to give a special thanks to Deborah Gersh Hernandez with Sunshine Week for helping to arrange the event. Thanks, Deb. And now I'd like to introduce the head table. When I call your names, please rise. From my left, we have Donna Leinwand of USA Today, a member of the Eric Friedheim National Journalism Library Board and Vice President of the National Press Club. Mark Hamrick of AP Broadcast and NPC Membership Secretary, and though I know his bosses know it, he's a great AP person and Press Club person. Thank you, Mark. Marcia Stanley, the wife of our speaker. And skipping over our speaker, we have Sylvia Smith, the Washington editor of the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette and president of the National Press Club in the Press Club Centennial Year. And I know Sylvia would want me to remind you that you're all invited to the Press Club Centennial Gala on April 5th if you happen to be in town. Next to Sylvia is Wes Pippert of the University of Missouri and the chairman of the National Press Club's Freedom of the Press Committee. Donna Reed of Media General, and Kemi Obashan, the widow of former National Press Club President John Obashan, after whom the club's Freedom of the Press Award is named. And we are pleased that Tom Curley is the 2006 winner of the Obashan Award. So let's turn to the main event tonight. Our speaker, Tom Curley, has been president and CEO of the Associated Press for the past 5 years. He previously spent 3 decades at Gannett, where he was a key member of the team that created USA Today, and later as publisher, he helped it shed the McPaper image by pushing for more substantive coverage. As the leader of AP, which is perhaps the most trusted worldwide source of information, he set an ambitious agenda for modernizing a news-gathering operation that's about 160 years old, one that has moved both literally and figuratively from the Pony Express to the era of nanotechnology. But Tom Curley is not just a man of words, he's a man of action, and he's been widely praised and won many awards from his colleagues for his innovative efforts to modernize the news business, protect the First Amendment, and pursue open government. In accepting a prestigious journalism award last year, he declared, quote, "We, the news industry, have come to that fork in the road. We must take bold, decisive steps to secure the audiences and funding to support journalism's essential role in both our economy and democracy, or find ourselves on an ugly path to obscurity." Now, since all of us, or many of us, work for papers or broadcast outlets that are on an ugly path, and we hope not to obscurity, we hope to hear from Tom Curley because he's not only an industry visionary concerned about surviving in turbulent times, he spent countless hours defending our free press and the public's right to know, defending free speech and open government in forums both friendly and hostile. I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, Tom Curley.
Thank you. Very generous. Thank you, and thank you, Rick, for that. And we also appreciate your work on behalf of the library, or the database world, as we now call it. It is a fight also worth fighting. You know, as I look around the room and see some folks that I've known for 30 or 40 years, I've known some of you from a different time when March was a time to go get sunshine of a different sort. And reflecting on where we are tonight and how many of you have given up a night to come and talk about free press issues, I would like to suggest that we are in a higher spot, doing some meaningful work. And I thank all of you for not only being here tonight, but supporting the Press Club's initiative and all those who are here who are working on behalf of Sunshine Week, which has turned into a absolutely marvelous and effective event. Several weeks ago, President Bush made a dinner speech to a group that calls itself the Alfalfa Club, and he got off a pretty good punchline at the expense of Vice President Cheney. The president told his audience that there had been a bridal shower earlier that day for his daughter, Jenna. He said friends and relatives gave her a lot of great stuff. Mom gave her a toaster. He said Karen Hughes gave her a Cuisinart. Then he pointed to the vice president. Dick over there gave her a gift that I could tell he picked out personally, a paper shredder. Well, okay, that was actually kind of a groaner, but you have to remember the writers were on strike at the time, and I'm thinking that maybe it was a homemade groaner, which is exactly why I'm repeating it this evening, as evidence, if you needed any, that our annual Sunshine Week festivities, our editorials, op-eds, and freedom of information audits still can bring chuckles in the upper reaches of the executive branch. But whatever response the president's line got from the Alfalfa Group was not the last laugh on the subject of reflexive secrecy in government. The executive branch is not the only player in town. Thanks to our system of checks and balances, the Sunshine community has been able to savor some pretty good days recently. After years of mostly playing defense and mostly getting beat, we've finally been able to get back on the offense and even score a few points. So let's take a moment as we call attention to the 4th annual National Sunshine Week to celebrate some accomplishments that not long ago seemed truly unattainable. A pretty decent reporter privilege bill has passed the House and cleared the Senate Judiciary Committee. Some give it an even chance of passing the Senate this year. The House and Senate bills have to be reconciled, and of course, after that, there's the trip to the White House, which doesn't like either one of them. But I don't think anybody in this room would say any longer it could never happen in the prevailing political climate. 3 years back, the conventional wisdom was that a national shield bill for journalists would be dead on arrival on Capitol Hill and wasn't even worth introducing. Yet the patient is not only alive, but ambulatory, and he even could walk right into the statute books. Other democracies like Australia, Japan, Germany, Italy, and Mexico have laws that protect reporter sources. In Sweden, it's actually illegal for a journalist to give up a source. And more than 30 states, plus the District of Columbia, shield news sources by statute, some of them absolutely without exception. Several more are preparing to join that list. The case of former colleague Tony Losi offers a dramatic example of why a shield law is necessary. Tony bravely is refusing to cough up a source and faces financial ruin, though she has said she has no information of value. A federal shield law really could happen, even when the conventional wisdom says the public and their elected leaders don't like reporters very much. We saw something almost as amazing happen not long ago. President Bush rang in the new year by signing a Freedom of Information Act, Information Amendment into law. That's something few would have bet on when the bill was introduced, and even its most zealous backers were nearly ready to give up on it at the 11th hour before the final version passed both houses of Congress. We can take justifiable pride in both these accomplishments. It took It's a product of a lot of work, and not just during Sunshine Week, but week in and week out all year long. 4 years ago, in a speech in Riverside, California, I offered the idea that it was time for friends of open government in the media to get serious and to get organized. And I also said we needed professional help if we really wanted statutes and policies that make it harder for government to keep toxic secrets and stiff-arm citizens who would ask to see public documents. And I said the campaign needed to become institutionalized, full-time, and permanent. Some who were in this room this evening rose to that challenge. They created a coalition called the Sunshine in Government Initiative, and they brought in veteran legislative consultant Claudia James of the Podesta Group to the table as a player coach. Under the guidance of Claudia and other professionals like Paul Boyle of NAA, Lucy Dalglish of the Reporters Committee, Tanda Rush of NNA, Barbara Cochran, and RTNDA, SGI members have engaged directly and effectively with members of Congress and their staffs. Early last December, even after both the House and Senate had passed FOIA bills, it looked like we were still not going to get the statute changed. The two versions were slightly different, and efforts to reconcile them were bogging down in parliamentary mechanics and inter-chamber politics. The clock was running out, and many of us, myself included, were ready to chalk it up as another year and another nice try. Around the SGI table, nobody was thinking that way. They kept their heads and worked the phones. They opened up the channels of communication and compromise among the key Hill players. Without SGI's smart, hard work and the contacts and credibility nurtured over the last 3 years, the Open Government Act of 2007 never would have made it to the President's desk. Of course, there wasn't a public signing ceremony in honor of the Freedom of Information Amendment at the White House on New Year's Eve, and I don't think any pens were handed out. But even if it did happen behind closed doors, the President's signature on the Open Government Act was still a great moment for us and all Americans. Though, as it turns out, it was a lot like that moment of sweet relief right near the end of a horror movie where everyone thinks the monster is dead just before it lurches back to life for one more round of slashing. Don't get me wrong, I'm not calling anybody a monster. But this city does have some mean streets, and Pennsylvania Avenue can be one of the meanest. If you don't watch yourself, you can get mugged at either end and sometimes in between. So SGI was alert when the administration slipped a sucker punch into this year's budget bill intended to cripple the new FOIA law. The alarms are now ringing on Capitol Hill and beyond. The law, as it went to the White House, provides for an Office of Government Information Services to serve as an ombudsman for FOIA requesters, a sort of referee that they can turn to when the agencies deny requests. But a few lines buried deeply in the proposed budget bill would repeal that provision and move those functions to the Justice Department. It's worse than a bad idea. It's a calculated insult to the sponsors of the legislation from both parties and to the constituents they intended to help with these important changes to FOIA. The Justice Department's real job is to advise and defend agencies which would want to withhold information. Making justice any kind of referee in those situations would be like allowing Manny Acta to call balls and strikes at a Nationals game. So the fight goes on, and we're keeping the champagne on ice. What we can celebrate this year at SGI and elsewhere, we finally are developing the muscles, the moves, and the marathon mentality to hold up our own side of the perpetual contest between sunshine and secrecy. Some of the news business think it compromises our objectivity as journalists to set ourselves up as players on matters of public policy, even in a cause as just and close to our hearts as open government. I respect those high-minded intentions behind this view, but I strongly disagree. When a matter of public policy poses a straight-up choice between the public's rights of access to government and a government effort to infringe or even narrow those rights, journalists cannot pretend to be disinterested observers. Journalists openly and routinely badger executive agencies and the courts for information and access we think the Constitution says the public is supposed to have. Taking our case to the legislative branch, in principle, is no different. It's all news gathering by other means. Getting down in the legislative trenches may not suit everybody's style, but as a minimum, the leaders of every news organization should consider being wholehearted, full-throated participants in Sunshine Week. The American Society of Newspaper Editors certainly has shown us how to connect what we do with the people's efforts at self-government. In 2003, they began organizing an ongoing proactive approach to freedom of information initiatives, which led to these Sunshine Weeks. For 1 week every year, we commit ourselves to doing what we're always telling ourselves we don't do nearly enough of, explaining to our audiences why a free press in an open society matters to them. Your name and your voice are needed. Pitch in and help. As Clarence Darrow once said, you can only protect your liberties in this world by protecting the other man's freedom. You can only be free if I am free. Andy Alexander, Cox Washington Bureau Chief and AS&E Sunshine Week leader, reminds us Sunshine Week's rapid expansion has given it real momentum. It is now on the verge of becoming an enduring national event. But if it stagnates, it could easily die, along with the potential gains being sought by those who believe in open government. The brightest rays from Sunshine Weeks have spotlighted countless efforts by citizens to hold their governments accountable. By reporting on their efforts, we have revealed for millions important lessons in fighting city halls, state houses, and yes, even Washington. By fighting the good fight, we have boosted the chances of state organizations to win victories as well. Two of the states with the worst reputations for open government, Louisiana and Pennsylvania, have seen important reforms passed. And that brings me to what I believe is the biggest issue facing those who believe in strengthening democracy through public scrutiny. Media, of course, are undergoing massive change from new technologies. And the question media leaders are asked most frequently is, are we changing fast enough? Whether talking about new technologies or sunshine, our answer is the same. We must do more. We must do more because the entrenched powers have become far more determined to avoid public scrutiny when it matters most. A quadrennial election is the perfect time to renew and strengthen our commitment. One of the most harmful developments of recent years was the notorious Ashcroft Memorandum that assured agencies that the Justice Department would back any plausible case for keeping any secret. This action reversed the policy of the previous Attorney General that all government information should be disclosed unless it can be shown that real harm would be the likely result. That policy was the correct one, the one most consistent with democratic principles and the law. Yet two attorneys general have refused to revise it. This is the moment to make it clear to all the presidential candidates how important a reversal of the Ashcroft Directive is to us and to the people. We need to ask the candidates at every opportunity until we have a clear, unequivocal answer whether they are willing to appoint an Attorney General willing to follow the spirit as well as the letter of the law that protects the people's right to know what their government is doing. Secrecy is one of the handiest tools for government that wants to be accountable only to itself, regardless of the spirit of the law. At AP, we're reminded of that truth daily as we struggle with the case of our photographer, Bilal Hussein. Nearly 2 years ago, Bilal was arrested by U.S. forces in Iraq and has been a prisoner ever since. Our military says he's a terrorist who infiltrated AP's ranks. To say the least, we see things very differently. Bilal is one of at least a dozen Iraqi photographers whose coverage of the most dangerous scenes of the war and suffering in regions where insurgents are active has been interrupted or stopped altogether by U.S. military arrests and detentions. It's impossible not to conclude that the words and pictures these journalists produce were considered unhelpful to the war effort and that their arrests would have served a broader strategy of information control. Ironically, the throttling of visuals, try it again, the throttling of visual news coverage from combat regions has had unintended consequences. By removing all the photographers in Anbar province, there was no one there to document the good news that resulted from the surge, including the everyday activities of citizens living normally. And we now know that the military's efforts to turn Vietnam on its ear, control coverage from the battlefield, is being implemented beyond Iraq. Most recently, Afghanistan became another battlefield where a journalist, this time a cameraman from Canadian television, has been arrested and held without charges. If the current mindset had held sway during World War II, the Marine Corps Memorial across the river would look very different. There would have been no Joe Rosenthal picture from Iwo Jima. Please consider what would have been lost from our national story had not AP photographers trudged and frequently suffered alongside the troops from the Civil War to Iraq. AP's Chuck Solar has compiled a selection of images of war photography from AP's archives. Several images near the end of the montage were taken by Bilal Hussein. Please play the photo reel now. Thank you.
This was the administration's slideshow of war photographs.
As you've been reminded, war is beyond hell. Those who serve and sacrifice deserve that their story be told. And all of us are owed the truth on how the military and its civilian leadership are faring on what often is a government's most fateful policy decision, conducting a war. So the damaging fallout from Bilal's case is far more serious than the detention of one more Iraqi among nearly 30,000 being held. It is a public display of disrespect for the rule of law, disrespect before a people to whom we pledge to deliver the fruits of freedom and justice for all. Bilal spent 19 months in prison without any due process worthy of the name before the case finally was referred to the Iraqi criminal courts. And even now, 6 months further along, Bilal has yet to see the evidence against him. Neither he nor his attorneys have been allowed to examine documents or cross-examine witnesses. In fact, Bilal has not even been told the charges against him. The military has never offered evidence of crime that would survive careful scrutiny by an impartial court. Whether there will be any such scrutiny remains in doubt. What we are learning is that the effort to thwart the First Amendment requires a full-scale assault on most of the rest of the Constitution as well. Bilal's captors have done their best in large and small ways to see that there won't be justice, either the kind the U.S. Constitution supposedly guarantees or that provided by the UN Charter. The military has released thousands of Iraqi detainees, many of whom previously had taken up arms against U.S. interests in Iraq. No one has ever alleged that Bilal was a threat for anything more than carrying a camera. This case has never been about Bilal Hussein. It is a clash between the people and their access to information. The military took some time to interpret the lessons of Vietnam and develop policies to counter outcomes it deemed not in its best interests. We in the press have taken too long to learn the lessons of Iraq. As we celebrate Sunshine Week, Bilal's story is a grim and timely illustration of a basic fact of life, where the powers that be can decide for themselves what is freedom of speech or of the press. They can and will start suiting themselves about the meaning of unreasonable searches and seizures and of a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. The results will not be what the Founding Fathers had in mind when those life-giving phrases were written. American presidents throughout my lifetime, and often long before, have said it is best to confront and defeat threats to freedom overseas before they can reach our own shores. As Bilal Hussein and thousands of others await justice in foreign prisons, we, whose job it is to keep information from becoming a prisoner of policy and convenience, should consider this advice and, as the lawyers like to say, govern ourselves accordingly. One of the best things we can do for our country is to make the sun shine this week and every week, not for ourselves, but for the cause of free people everywhere. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Tom. I'd like to start with a couple of questions about the Bilal Hussein case. First, I was wondering if any members of Congress or others are championing his case, if there are other media organizations, if there basically what people who are sitting here could do other than simply spread the word.
Well, thank you. We are in a delicate process. We were put under a gag order when the first day of hearing was held on December 9th. And since that time, we have been picking our words carefully and looking for help from every place. I think what the point we are at is we are seeing the case move forward in the court system. We are watching things carefully, but because they still have our guy, we are being very measured in terms of what we can say. I do think that there is an area of great concern, and that is the supervision and the oversight of the prison systems, whether they're in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Eastern Europe, or at Guantanamo, and who is capable of providing that oversight. So yes, there have been a lot of contacts on the Hill, but the case is said to be clearly with the U.S. military, and so far we haven't been able to budge them. We have made a number of efforts, and it all has backfired. So at some point we will release some additional information, and at that point we hope we can enlist you in some support.
We saw one of the photographs up there of caskets. That has been another example of the Bush administration trying to prevent photographs as caskets return to the United States. I was wondering what Associated Press has done to try to change that policy, what other media organizations can do so that not only are we permitted to provide images of battlefields, but also of the dead returning to the United States.
Well, we've all tried, and we've all been turned down, and I think your question is another reminder that we should keep trying, and we should never stop trying. I find those pictures very moving and very unifying. I mean, all of us really do appreciate the sacrifices that are being made, and of course the policy has been to have all that done quietly. We have redoubled our efforts to make sure we're providing pictures at graveside services or other services wherever they're held throughout the country, and to make sure we're giving as good an accounting of the soldier or Marine's life when that opportunity is provided.
I wanted to ask a couple of questions about the enforcement and implementation of the FOIA law. The first thing is, being the bureau chief for a Texas newspaper, we've been all over the story because Senator Cornyn worked with Senator Leahy to pass it, and he, though he is one of the biggest supporters of the Bush administration, has been crossways with the president on this one. What can be done? I mean, the Bush administration budget proposal isn't necessarily the final word, but what can be done to make sure that what was passed last year is implemented as Congress wrote it? Senator Cornyn says that that they clearly were ignoring the letter and the intent of the law.
Look, there are two things that we have to do. We absolutely have to connect what we're doing to the public's interest. We are not going to win an election anywhere, anytime, any place. I mean, that is clear. It is not about us. It cannot be about us. It has to be about the people's interests. And I thought Senators Leahy and Cornyn did a really outstanding job at the hearing in that they brought in citizens and representatives from their home areas and showed how open government had really worked. The second point I would like to make is, you know, it's always about language. And so we're in a room full of wordsmiths, so I can get away with this. But, you know, this really is something beyond freedom of information. This became a vote on competency in government, and having the people be able to understand whether their government was acting in a competent way. We've had a number of examples that were provided by any number of newspapers, and they're absolutely marvelous, and I think this is one of the great things that has come from the Sunshine Week effort, to have people, have the newspaper showcase what citizens have done locally that has changed the system, has worked for the public good across the country. So to the extent that we continue to put the spotlight on all these efforts, we're going to be stronger and be successful, and that will raise the drumbeat for those who are willing to be friends of sunshine.
Have any of the Associated Press reporters who are following all the presidential candidates every step of the way asked the candidates what they would do about the Ashcroft memorandum? And someone in the audience also just asked, is there a difference who among the presidential candidates is likely to be among the greatest advocates of openness in government?
I'm not going near the second question. I think we have a tremendous opportunity to ask the three where they stand, and I have a feeling that the AP reporters now will ask those questions. Sandy. Sandy Johnson, our Washington bureau chief, reports that that word went out this afternoon. We are AS&E, NAA are meeting here in a couple of weeks, and Senator McCain has confirmed that he will speak at the AP program, so that will be an opportunity for us to ask him directly. Senator Clinton answered some questions, and her views on Sunshine are up on the Sunshine Week website, so I would direct people there, and I understand it's gotten a large number of hits already. So, but now is the chance. This is what we have to do with all candidates at all levels.
Why do you think there is so much public hostility toward the media and toward the First Amendment as it relates to the media? And do you think the public is buying the government's national security arguments on the side of secrecy?
I think the last question was, do you think the government is buying?
No, the public is buying.
The public is buying that. You know, you watch the surveys, and sometimes we do better than others, but I really think that if you dissected the Constitution in any of its parts, to try to pull that whole thing back together these days would certainly be tough, especially in the age of the type of political advertising that exists out there. But it's been fun this week to watch the John Adams miniseries and think what it took to pull all that together. So I think that we have to work hard on behalf of the rights. And I think we have made some mistakes in fighting our own case over the years, and we have been, some of us have also tried to be outspoken about some things. The off the record, we all know that off the record is going to be a part of the way it's done, but we really should resist that as often as possible. There are a number of times when AP people have walked out of meetings, and a few others have joined us. And I think there are more times when we have to be willing to stand up and walk out and try to get the information on the record some other way. So whether it's sourcing or explaining how we work, these are things we have to do and work harder at. So that's also part of our message during Sunshine Week.
Do you think the news media has done an adequate job reporting on First Amendment related issues? And what do you think is the level of public awareness on some of these issues like Bilal Hussein or Tony Losi?
Well, the answer is we have not done nearly the job, and I have always been shocked at how little time we spend covering ourselves, except when 7 or more people are about to be laid off, at which point we go and talk ourselves almost into a nervous breakdown. And so if we had spent just 1/10 the ink in the last year on Sunshine versus what we spent on our industry technology challenge, I think we would be further ahead. So no, we don't do a very good job of covering ourselves, and this is one of the gaps in the coverage area, and we have to be much more aggressive at it. The Tony Losi case, given the nature of it, I think has gotten a lot of good attention. There are some things that are out there to be explained. Court cases, as court cases go, you know, as one who used to cover the courts, I always wondered how many people were going to read a court story, but I think this one has been explained pretty well and is out there. The Bilal case has had some fits and starts and some runs. I don't know how many people are interested in one more Iraqi, and I wish more people were, because this one is telling, and I believe there's a book in this one when additional information is made public.
How can individual journalists take steps to promote access and fight government restrictions in their daily interactions with government agencies? And then another related question, what's the best thing the National Press Club and its members could do to advance the cause of press freedom?
Well, look, I think the National Press club does a lot of great things by, and most important, getting people here on the record and then grilling them and asking them a lot of questions. And I think your library database project is another example out there. We have to improve with the times, and those of us in leadership positions have to provide more training on database initiatives. I'm pleased to say at AP that our training budget now exceeds $1 million. And I think this is symptomatic of the era that we're in. We really have to show some number of people how to get information that they otherwise don't know. There are some marvelous experts in this town who really know how to pound the pavements and dig out information. And the information they get is powerful. It changes anything. It's virtually scientific because it is so thorough it can't be argued in any spin cycle. And to the extent that we source, background, and explain, and then always tell it in an interesting way, we can be successful.
I have two almost identical questions, so I will do a combination of the two. In this period of cost-cutting by news organizations, do you worry about the willingness of news executives to fund legal efforts to force release of public records, and then also to file court cases that will challenge First Amendment violations and restrictions?
You know, it's a really good question, and I'm happy to say, since just about all the industry CEOs are on my board, I can tell you that there is as much fervor for freedom of the press issues as has ever existed. And there is total solidarity, and no matter what's going on, people so far have shown not only do they have the money, but they have the belly for the fight. And I think they know that whatever we're supposed to do, we have to earn the public's trust, and that starts with credibility. And you know, if we lose that, that's when the business will really be in trouble, and no one's about to throw that away. I think their efforts have been absolutely steady, and in the last couple of years, with the help of some of these initiatives, I can tell you that it's a front and center initiative about just about any company I know.
Now we're coming to the in other business part of the program where we have miscellaneous questions of interest, and we'll start with bloggers here. Should Congress enact legislation to protect bloggers as well as traditional media outlets? This is something that came up in the FOIA debate last year and this year.
Let me first say that many of the iconic images that AP has provided over the years are from citizens. You'll recall probably one most famous from the Oklahoma City bombing, the fireman with the baby who later died. That was from a citizen. And also the shuttle blow up over Texas. That picture was provided by a heart surgeon who was an amateur photographer at the time, not using fancy equipment that AP people would use, but actually consumer model equipment. So getting information from more sources is what we live for. And I think that if you look at the possibility of what this offers in terms of being able to watch what's going on and more eyes and ears, this is a great moment, and it gives me great faith that, you know, content is not under siege. More people are producing more content, and more people are consuming more content everywhere in the world more than ever before. And that's the upside of the challenges of this era.
You talk about secrecy challenges in the United States. There are more of them in China, and someone would like to know what AP and others can do if the government of China asks them to downplay Olympic boycott voices or protests with the implicit threat of limited coverage or no coverage at all. So I wanted to ask what, if any, pressure has been applied thus far, and what kind of issues will this raise for all American journalists or international journalists?
I was reminded that I didn't quite answer the last question on the bloggers. I believe the bloggers should have the rights that the rest of us are entitled to, and some of the debate has been over working for an identifiable news organization. And at this point, that was left off the table. We couldn't get consensus on that, on identifying that. However, there are lawyers in the room, and if I need to be corrected, I ask that they stand up and do so. They are not standing up, probably because they're on my payroll, and so in terms of the China situation and all these situations, I think we have an obligation to cover events. And it's not for us to get into protests unless we're barred from covering events. But it's about providing information from distant places. AP was created in 1846 to bring news back from the war in Mexico. And so international coverage and war coverage have been a part of our DNA since day one, 162 years ago. So we need to be in Tibet, and we need to be reporting on what's there. We have any number of people on the front lines in the world. We average that one person every 2 weeks is beaten in the name of getting stories out from remote places. We have lost 5 people covering Iraq. So these are big risks that we take. We need to be there to cover the news. Obviously, the situation in China has been known for years. They would do well in what we call the hard stuff of the Olympics, building buildings, establishing the infrastructure, and indeed, they're going to have venues that are absolutely the marvel of the world. They are already done, and that the infrastructure and cabling is all done, and I'm sure it will work beautifully, and they are charging us a fortune for that, as good capitalists do. The soft side of this, the human rights issues, of course, would be the story. And the Olympic contract calls for press freedom and free coverage. And I was privileged to get off a plane in China some months ago and be told I was going to give a freedom of the press speech. And then my meeting with the Politburo member a couple days later on press freedom through the Olympics Games was televised. And they said they would live up to the contract. Now, we are all reporting and watching what's happening in the run-up to the Games, and there are any number of stories, and you're seeing them be reported. But that is literally the yin and yang of the situation. The hard stuff being done well, it's going to be real tough for the marathoners, but the human rights issues will be a concern.
And a little bit of journalism prognosticating here. I'll ask 3 at once, and you can answer any way you would like. One, about the future of the business. Has broadcast media surpassed that of print? What about the future? Will online supplant them both? Or, I would ask as my corollary, are we all one? Then, are journalists irrelevant in an era of iReporters, non-journalist bloggers, and internet pundits? And finally, what keeps you awake at night when you're obsessing about our industry?
So, in a couple of minutes, let's put one thing in perspective. In 2006, for the first time ever, more people got their information from the internet on any given day than they did from any other source. So that's already past tense if you want to measure it that narrowly. Are we all one? Some of us are talking that way, but we know inside our organizations we are not there by any stretch of the imagination, and we are all looking at what the next steps are. We just did another restructuring at AP on the business side this week to try to drive all of us to one in that connection, and so it becomes important that we understand that digital is important. The short answer in terms of where we're going, I think, would be like this. In 1995, along came the browser. The browser opened up access for the average folk to the World Wide Web. We all set about creating what now are called legacy websites. And so where are we in 2008? Well, in 2007, in the United States at least, along came something called the smartphone, and more specifically, the iPhone. And so I think that is the line of demarcation for something else. The content is really moving in a viral way. And so it's being freed from evening newscasts, from newspapers, and from those legacy websites to travel to devices like these and the more smartphones that are being snapped up every day. So that requires a whole different way of doing business. And frankly, we're working on some programs with our board, and we hope to announce some of those in a few weeks at the annual meeting.
And before I ask the final question, I would like to make two presentations. One is the hot off the presses documentary on the National Press Club, the National Press Club, A Century of Headlines, and the new National Press Club Centennial Mug, which features the soon-to-come-out journalism stamp on journalist Eric Severide, who said a few profound things, including that this room looked like a roll-top desk. Now, the final question. If you had $5 million to spend any way you wanted to enhance American journalism, what would you do?
Well, look, I make that decision several times a day for a lot more money than that. I mean, we gave the board a heads up on a small acquisition we're thinking about today. We are looking at content initiatives in several fields that will require that times some multiple. And so I think what I would like to leave you with, and in partial payment for the inspirational mug, is this. This is a tremendous opportunity for people who do content, and it's especially a good opportunity for those in journalism. The journalist has not and will not be replaced and cannot be replaced. Nothing has come along today to replace the journalist. There are not journalists in any quantity at these new media organizations. They are still living on what it is we do. And I think we just need to understand that we cannot ignore a 200-year change in technology either. So we just can't be so buried in the sand that we ignore different ways of distribution. So that is the challenge. It's not really on the content side, and that's what gives me hope. No one is going to replace the brains in this room, or the energy, or the willingness, especially of a crowd like this, to speak truth to power. A lot of these other companies are in effect government-based, government carriers operating on utility lines, and they have been and already have turned over their records about who is using their information and seeking their information. Tony Losi will not turn over her records. That's the difference in what it takes to be a journalist, and that hasn't gone away.
Well, I would like to thank our distinguished speaker, thank all of you, thank the people behind Sunshine Week, and end up by thanking Press Club staff members Julie Hsu, and David King, and Bill McCarran for helping out with this. Good luck in the year ahead with freedom of the press, and we're adjourned.
Sure.
Mugshot.
How about with the president, too? For all the people in Fort Wayne.
Turn around.
Oh, okay. Gotta do the president.